The news broke on a quiet Tuesday morning, catching the world off guard. What seemed like an ordinary day quickly turned extraordinary as headlines flashed across every screen. China has pulled the plug, sending shockwaves through global markets and governments alike. In a stunning move, Beijing announced a complete and immediate halt on the export of critical materials to the United States, leaving officials scrambling for answers. This wasn't just another trade spat. It was a calculated strategic maneuver to weaponize China's overwhelming dominance over the global supply chain, a dominance built over decades. Overnight, the flow of rare earth elements, specialized electronics, and vital chemicals simply stopped, leaving factories and warehouses in limbo. The arteries feeding America's advanced industry and military were clamped shut, as if someone had turned off the nation's lifeblood. The initial reaction was disbelief. Then, as the reality set in, panic spread through boardrooms and trading floors. For decades, the US built its technological edge on globalized trade, outsourcing the sourcing and production of key materials to China, trusting in the stability of international commerce. That relentless pursuit of efficiency created a profound vulnerability, one now ruthlessly exposed and turned into a powerful weapon. The very components for everything from smartphones to fighter jets, from consumer gadgets to national defense systems, were suddenly denied, leaving shelves and assembly lines empty. The digital decree from Beijing was a new kind of blockade. No warships, no visible conflict, just a chilling silence that echoed across industries. America's ability to defend itself and maintain its technological edge was now in jeopardy, as leaders faced the consequences of years of dependency. July 20, 2025, became a turning point, a wake-up call for a nation caught unprepared, forcing Americans to confront a new and uncertain reality. The question now loomed larger than ever. Can America rebuild its supply chains and restore its independence before it's too late? Or has the world changed forever? The US military's power relies on more than just advanced weapons. It's built on a foundation of specialized materials and components, many of which are sourced from overseas. Surprisingly, the majority of these critical resources come from a single country: China. Over 80% of America's rare earth elements, essential for everything from jet engines to night vision, are imported from this strategic rival. These aren't obscure metals. They're the backbone of modern technology, powering missile guidance systems, advanced sensors, and the electronics that give the US military its edge. The dependency goes even deeper. Circuit boards, microchips, and even the most basic electronic components are all tied to Chinese supply chains, making it nearly impossible to separate American defense from foreign manufacturing. Even pharmaceuticals and chemicals used in explosives and medical supplies often originate in Chinese factories, further entangling America's security with China's industrial output. A disruption from Beijing wouldn't just threaten hardware. It could jeopardize the health, safety, and readiness of US troops on the front lines, leaving them vulnerable in unexpected ways. China's central role in this global supply web is no accident. It's the result of decades of focused industrial policy, government investment, and strategic planning to dominate key sectors. For years, outsourcing production allowed US companies to focus on innovation and design, but this came at a hidden cost: a growing vulnerability in national security. The just-in-time global logistics network, designed for maximum efficiency, left no buffer for crisis or conflict, no room for error if the flow is interrupted. America's Achilles heel isn't a flaw in its armor or technology. It's the hidden fragility of its supply chain, exposed in times of tension or disruption. The system built for speed and cost savings has proven dangerously brittle, unable to withstand shocks or sudden changes in the global landscape. Now the world's most powerful military stands on feet of clay, its strength undermined by a reliance on distant factories and foreign suppliers. The true cost of this dependency is now clear: a strategic vulnerability that could shape America's future in ways few anticipated. China's cutoff was brutally simple. No blockades, just a digital directive. Overnight, exports of rare earths, gallium, and graphite to the US were banned. Customs officials halted shipments, American factories ran dry. Just-in-time inventory systems became instant liabilities. Production lines for everything from drones to munitions slowed or stopped. The embargo was more than raw materials. It targeted subcomponents too. Even parts sourced from allies, often traced back to Chinese factories now offline. The full impact would take weeks to unravel. China had mapped America's dependencies and struck at the pressure points. By weaponizing the global system, Beijing flipped the script. The message: US technological superiority is now conditional. The world's superpower was left scrambling. The disruption hit America's most advanced military platforms immediately. The F-35 fighter jet, reliant on hundreds of pounds of rare earths, faced catastrophic slowdowns. The Navy's Aegis combat system and Tomahawk missiles depend on Chinese-sourced electronics and magnets. Night vision goggles, GPS receivers, and communications gear, all compromised by the supply cut. The problem isn't just building new weapons, it's maintaining the existing arsenal. Spare parts often sourced from China became scarce. Maintenance depots faced shortages, grounding aircraft and sidelining vehicles. The technological edge the US relied on was suddenly at risk. The arsenal at risk wasn't just on the assembly line, it was already in the field. Readiness rates began to fall. America's military might was now hostage to a supply chain crisis. The shockwave hit defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon hard. Production schedules unraveled overnight as key suppliers vanished. Frantic meetings followed, inventory checks, global searches for alternatives, and dire cost projections. Stock prices tumbled, smaller suppliers faced shutdowns. The once efficient supply chain became a chain of falling dominoes. Risk management had never accounted for a politically motivated disruption of this scale. Contractors scrambled to find new sources, but developing alternatives takes years. The Pentagon demanded solutions, but the industry pointed to decades of government-encouraged globalization. Warnings went to Congress. Without intervention, weapons production would stall and costs would soar. The crisis exposed deep systemic vulnerabilities. America's defense industry was built on a fragile foundation. The ripple effects were just beginning. The US government's response was swift but chaotic. The president invoked the Defense Production Act, prioritizing defense contracts and incentivizing new suppliers. A special task force mapped vulnerabilities and coordinated a national response. Diplomats raced to secure rare earths from allies like Australia and Canada. Strategic stockpiles were tapped, but reserves were limited. The search for new suppliers extended to Mexico, India, and Eastern Europe. Friendshoring became the new mantra, reorienting supply chains toward trusted partners. Inside the Pentagon, every major weapons program was reviewed for Chinese dependencies. Engineers scrambled to redesign components and substitute materials. The process was painful, but necessary. America was forced to choose resilience over maximum performance. The scramble to rebuild had begun. The crisis sparked a movement to bring manufacturing back to the US, reshoring. Billions in federal funding flowed to rebuild domestic capacity for semiconductors, rare earths, and chemicals. New training programs aimed to rebuild the skilled workforce lost to decades of offshoring. Companies collaborated on innovation, rare earth recycling, synthetic substitutes, and more. The Mountain Pass mine in California was revived, with new processing plants rising in Texas and Wyoming. The goal, a secure, end-to-end domestic supply chain for critical defense tech. The process is long and costly, but seen as essential for national security. American consumers and taxpayers will bear the cost, but the price of dependency is higher. The reshoring effort is a fundamental shift in strategy. Industrial strength is now national security. The US aims never to be this vulnerable again. The road home will take years, maybe a generation. But the consensus is clear: the era of complacency is over. America is rebuilding its industrial backbone. China's bold move escalated the simmering US-China rivalry into a new kind of Cold War. One not just about ideology, but fiercely fought over technology, resources, and global influence. Economic power quickly became a weapon, as both superpowers used trade, investment, and sanctions to force nations to choose sides in this high-stakes standoff. America's allies in Europe and Asia, alarmed by their own vulnerabilities, began urgently securing their supply chains, investing in alternative routes, and stockpiling critical materials. Alliances strengthened, with friendshoring and trusted partnerships at the core of a new collective security and economic framework. The world split into two rival economic spheres, one led by Washington, the other by Beijing, each with its own rules, standards, and networks. Developing nations found themselves caught in the middle, pressured to align with one bloc or the other, often at the cost of their own interests. China's Belt and Road Initiative deepened its influence across Asia, Africa, and beyond. while the US countered with advanced technology, security guarantees, and new partnerships. The competition for the allegiance of the Global South became a key battleground, with both sides offering incentives and making promises. The crisis shattered the long-held belief that economic interdependence would always guarantee peace and stability. Instead, it revealed that interdependence could be weaponized, turning once reliable connections into sources of risk and leverage. The new Cold War will be fought not just on battlefields but in boardrooms, research labs, and the invisible realm of digital infrastructure. The fallout from the Great Cutoff will shape global affairs, economies, and security strategies for decades to come. The world is now more unstable and more divided than at any time in recent memory, with uncertainty looming over the future. The supply chain crisis of 2025 redefined national security for America. Security is no longer just military might, it's economic resilience and technological independence. A nation isn't secure if its defenses rely on a rival's resources. True security now demands a whole-of-nation approach: industry, energy, education, and defense working together. Industrial policy, trade, and education are now part of the security equation. The crisis exposed the cost of decades of short-term thinking. America must now invest for the long term: research, infrastructure, and domestic production. Bipartisan commitment is needed to rebuild the nation's industrial base. The lesson: economic interdependence is not a guarantee of peace, but a potential vulnerability. America must confront its weaknesses and rebuild its foundations. The path forward is long and costly, but the goal is clear: resilience and sovereignty. National security now means being able to stand alone if necessary. The wake-up call cannot be ignored.